Yo, welcome back, guys. I've been having so much fun on Warlock in TBC. Not only do we have good raid specs, but we have good dungeon specs as well. We're good in BGs, we're good in arena, and there's multiple good specs we can play in dungeons and in raid. Not just one good spec, not just two good specs, but a handful of good specs we can play. And we cover all of that in this first episode of our Warlock podcast. Me, J-Pain, Ryusei, and Crix have been working on this podcast and planning on it for quite some time. Especially me and Crix have been super excited to get it going. So we aired the first episode of the podcast over on Crix's page today, and I gotta say, you guys, we had a freaking blast. It was a great time. I'm really looking forward to doing more and more episodes, and we have plenty more episodes to come. So many things to talk about. So without further ado, guys, let's watch the first episode because I had a blast doing it.
We're just going to do heroic footage in the background of us. It's going to be go back and forth. We're going to talk about dungeon specs and specking for dungeons. Mainly heroics, as normals don't really mean much, but we can touch on it if we want. This is just random heroic footage playing in the background. We're going to go in a circle, starting with a live. We can talk about all the specs we want. We'll hit one spec at a time, starting with Demo. Because I guess I should let him answer. What is your favorite spec for dungeons there?
So I think that there's a lot of viable dungeon specs, and I will agree to a lot of the people in Twitch chat and a lot of people that are going to be watching this on YouTube. I will agree that it is kind of a hassle to keep your Felguard up, but I still like rocking Demonology in dungeons, and I mix it up from the typical raiding demo build, taking some points out of the destruction tree and putting them into the affliction tree. So I get 5/5 improved corruption to have instant cast corruptions, because it's really nice to be able to utilize an instant cast spell and being able to move during that global when you're in a dungeon, so you can line of sight a spell cast of a siren or something like that. And on top of that, you also get to go down into 2/2 improved drain soul. Now, obviously, the first part of improved Drain Soul doesn't really mean that much because you're not looking to kill a mob with your Drain Soul. But the reduced threat to affliction is huge. And I'm sure all the warlocks in here are already well aware that if you can reduce the threat that your Seed of Corruption does, that is a game changer. So that's why I picked that up. And you could potentially get some points into improved life tap as well, which is really nice. But I ended up opting to go to 2 points into Demonic Resilience to try to really help keep your Felguard alive and put less pressure on your healer in the dungeon. And speaking of healers, you'll see that I have 1 out of 3 mana feed to keep mana on your Felguard, but depending on your group composition, let's say that you're running with the same people, the same guildies all the time. If you have a Resto Shaman keeping down improved mana spring and rotating in mana tides, you don't even need the mana feed talent. You can actually get 3/3 demonic resilience to really help keep your pet alive. Or if you just so happen to be running with a shadow priest, which I know is not that often, there's not a whole lot of shadow priests out there, but if you are running dungeons all the time with a shadow priest friend, then you could also take points out of mana feed because you just don't really need it. But that's the dungeon spec that I spammed most of my heroics with, and it just feels really good. I personally got to spam dungeons with the guild's prot paladin because he's a really good friend of mine, so I was a little bit spoiled with that. I didn't have to deal with many bear tanks. I didn't have to deal with many warrior tanks, which I know this is way worse than having a prot pally. As a prot pally, you're allowed to seed much more often, so I really got to use the best bang for my buck with Seed, especially with demonic knowledge giving you a bunch of spell power to Seed, demonic tactics giving you critical strike chance to your Seed, which is amazing. And I would also like to put a little note in there that if you're deep Destro, you don't get that because Devastation only adds critical strike rating to your destruction spells, so it will not affect Seed of Corruption. And Seed of Corruption doesn't have the greatest spell power ratio, so that critical strike rating is super juicy. So I was a little bit spoiled in having a prot paladin, but even if you don't have a prot paladin, this spec still is really good and does good single target damage as well.
Okay, and that's the build up here. So let's go with Rye. What was your favorite little build there, bud?
Well,
Your favorite heroic build?
I mean, everyone knows like I'm a big fire shield, and well, I mean, I've done all my my heroics as fire, and you know it works quite fine. I like it. There's two things. One is that when you when you're like pugging, I find that you can't really exploit Seed of Corruption that much. So on a lot of times you get like you go pack by pack, you know, like 3 mobs, 4 mobs at most, and you know just like tab immolate, and then you spam like the most dangerous thing, or like you just 1 or 2 seeds, and like that really pumps and that melts the pack. And you know it helps like you, especially towards the beginning when you had some like paper tanks, like you kill one thing very easily, and that alleviates a lot of the pressure there. So that's good. The thing is, there's also the fact that I like thinking of you know, thinking ahead and thinking, oh, do I actually can I actually stay fire, or is that like a good AoE pack where I can seed and where you know I should seed, and in which case you know I'd get out the succubus and sacrifice it. So there's this kind of little thing that I like, and you know having like 6 sets on me for different different opportunities. I legit have like at all time between 35 and 40 pieces of gear on me just to be able to switch.
So
Like,
then that leads to a
legit.
question I have for both you and J-Paint, but I want to see, because I know J-Paint's fire, I want to see if he has anything to add to that first before I ask the questions.
So I actually do the exact same thing. I've got 3 to 4 pieces of every single gear slot in my bag at all time, ready to adjust to any situation. So I have a Shadow Priest in my group for some dungeon I'm running Shadow the whole dungeon. If I have a Fire Mage, I'm running Fire. If I don't have either, I'm running Fire. If I see an AoE pack, I'm running Shadow. So it's very playing just a hybrid Destro spec just allows you to adjust to pretty much any situation that you're gonna be in. So I do the same thing as Ryusi with the gear.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the only slight thing that I dislike a bit with like full Destro is that sometimes when you actually do need to use a pet, that's a big surge. Because
Right.
like yes, sometimes I need to get out the succubus and charm, and I'm like, oh, there
Yeah,
goes my
so
damage.
if you're in a group, say you don't have a mage or a rogue, you have no CC, then your best CC is you seducing something, right? If it's a humanoid. And you lose, I mean, you basically just straight up lose 15% damage when you're forced to do that. So that is kind of a downfall of Destro, deep Destro in heroics, but we all know about the DN build where you're basically going Destro into Nightfall. You can play with a Succubus out, you can play with an Imp out, you can play with whatever you want. In heroics, I'd probably recommend using Succubus for that just to get some CC. You can even throw Soothing Kiss on some bosses, 10% hit reduction, all that stuff. So that's
I
one of the
know-
downfalls for sure.
Yeah.
I know Crix is a big DN shell, and I will say that I will say that if you're not spoiled like I was and you don't have a prot paladin, most of the time you're pugging and you're dealing with a warrior tank or a bear tank. Obviously, you're not going to be able to seed. And in any situation where you're not able to seed, being able to utilize corruption, instant cast corruption, nightfall procs from corruption, empowered corruption, so your spell power gains more value for corruption. I think that these talents really, really do shine if you don't have a prot paladin, because then you actually really get to utilize corruption to its fullest. But as we all know, if you do get to spam seed, you just don't cast corruption. So if you guys out there are running heroics with pugs, or you're running with guildies but it's a warrior tank or a bear tank, I think DN is an extremely good spec for dungeons.
Which leads to my favorite spec, DN. And I don't mean these nuts. I mean Destro Nightfall. This is this was shown to me. I thought this was a meme in the Discord that people were just trying to bait people into saying these nuts. And then Rye told me, he's like, no, bro, this is a real spec. Try it.
You're
I
welcome.
pretty much-
You didn't believe me at first. That was quite
Yeah, I
fun.
pretty much haven't respec out of it outside of my 25 mans, which I'm debating going tonight. I'm gonna go Felguard tonight, but I think this is my last week in 25s going Felguard. I think I'm gonna go DN next afterwards. I love this build. Everybody knows that. It's not a fucking secret. It does a lot of, I think it's the best for heroics. It is monster bonkers AoE because the Shadow Fury, like Live said, you can start seeing like this pack coming up. I'm DN on this footage right here. You can start seeding right away, or you can just go, you're spec'd into Imp Corruption and Empowered Corruption. Let me pull this back up. And you can do a lot of damage. And as the single target is better than, it's better than what you would think it would be. It was better than what I expected. When I first saw the build, I was like, there's no way this is going to do anything on single target damage. It actually does do a lot of damage because you're corruption. You have instant corruption. right? And then you have the Empowered Corruption, which is at my gear level, which is like 400 spell power on my corruptions, right? Which also proc the Nightfall. And obviously the single target kind of wagers a little bit on the RNG of it. And I do realize that. I'm not going to go in there and say it's not, there's no RNG, heavily RNG single target. But I mean, being able to Shadow Fairy on cooldown single target, which is really weird to me because of the mana cost, but it's worth it. You get Backlash and Nightfall, which you do stack, and one Shadow Bolt does not clear both of them. You get two, if you get a Nightfall and a Backlash, you get 2 free Shadow Bolts. I mean, that doesn't happen much on single target bosses, but there's times when you can have it in trash packs if you're pulling aggro or not. Shadow Fury helps with so much control. Like a lot of the heroic, contrary to what everybody else is doing, I didn't run with the prop paladin until recently. I actually ran, my main tank in my guild is the prop warrior. He's an amazing one, so I don't have any issues with him tanking. But I ran with the bear for a long time, and he was a little bit newer, so that was a little rough. But the Shadow Fury helps so much when you're pugging, because you don't have a lot of control what happens. Even if you have a paladin, you might be a shitty paladin, right? You might be not conking, not doing everything, and that's what I really like this build. This is one of my favorite builds. I've done a Karazhan with this build, and I clapped. I've not been able to do any parse runs with it, but I'm going to this week. And yeah, that's my favorite build, man. I love it. I can't get away from it. I can't get away from it.
Yeah, no, I think Shadow Fury is like huge in this build. I pretty much leveled in dungeons in destruction, and like that's the one thing I really, really miss. Shadow Fury is just such an amazing spell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually slept on. I mean, I'm coming from the private server scene as well, and I never used Shadow Fury, not one time. Even when I leveled, I suggested not to go Shadow Fury. Go DSCS. And then I went Shadow Fury, and I was like, let me go ahead and recorrect that entire guide I just did, because this is broken. Like, you know what I mean? This is like really good. Because things change on private servers versus live, just like Classic. Some things are better than they were on private servers, and vice versa. So, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, during the initial leveling in dungeons, I also went Shadow Fury, and I gotta admit, it does feel really, really good. And one thing I also wanted to point out about Demonology, and this is actually like a hidden thing, all right, everyone, so take notes. You can't actually parse or even do well as Demonology if your Warlock rolled a bad name on your Felguard. So like Flaroon, you're not going to do well. Sharoon, you're not going to do well. Personally, I got lucky.
Sharon's the best name.
No. Oh, okay. The 2 best names, one of them, Jew Tom. That's a classic one. All right. And then I got real lucky. I was a boosty boy. I boosted to level 58, figured out what my name was, and I got Shaggin. So I call my boy, my thick boy. He get this, ready? He's the Shaggin' Wagon.
There you go, baby.
Yep.
Old guild. I was in a guild called Shaggin' Wagon. That's funny. Well, there you go.
So Demo's just not good. It's like a 500 DPS decrease if you just have a bad name. So maybe like re-roll your Warlock, level a new one. I don't know. Do what you need to do.
Yeah, it was good. Oh, so let's talk about what else we got here. Let's go with Affliction in dungeons. What do you guys think? How Affliction in normals and heroics? We need to talk about normals. I don't think we need to talk about normals, right? Let's talk about heroics. Normals are kind of like, we know Affliction's not going to be good in common sense in normals because everything dies so fast. So, and you're a dot class. Your job is to put 3-4 dots up on as many mobs as you can, and then Shadow Bolt or Seed. Everything's dead before you can put 2 dots on everything. So we don't need to talk about Affliction in normals, but we can talk about in heroics. Go ahead.
I think in heroics, it's even the same way. Like, Affliction is okay the longer things live. So like if you're in a pug group or just a freshly geared group that's struggling a little bit, I think in the same.
Your job is to put 3-4 dots up on as many mobs as you can, and then Shadow Bolt or Seed. Everything's dead before you can put 2 dots on everything. So we don't need to talk about Affliction in normals, but we can talk about in heroics. Go ahead.
I think in heroics, it's even the same way. Like, Affliction is okay the longer things live. So like if you're in a pug group or just a freshly geared group that's struggling a little bit, I think Affliction is not that bad. You get 5% seed damage from Contagion. You get improved Drain Soul for reduced threat on your Affliction spells. But again, the big downside is, do you have enough time to actually utilize your multi-dotting? Kind of depends on the strength of your group.
I agree with that. Like, I mean, most of the heroics I run with guildies, right? And there's not mobs living for more than 6, 7 seconds, right? They're getting basically 5 shot by a mage and a warlock. They're living for just not enough time for Affliction to do good damage. Maybe bosses live long enough, but overall, I don't think Affliction with the gear level that people have, even in heroics, is worth running. It's good in a fresh group with low gear, but other than that, I can't see it be worth running.
There you go. I like Affliction. I think Affliction is good at when everybody is more better on fresh servers where people weren't in private servers where people weren't carrying that classic gear into there and everybody's on that same level, because everybody starts doing heroics with that shitty gear. Thus, the mobs are lasting longer. Thus, you're able to UA corruption, agony, everything, then like a whole pack, and then start seeding. But that's live short. That's like day one of heroics, and all of a sudden everyone's out gearing it. So
yeah, but at this point,
sadly,
like, yeah, sorry,
oh, good,
Chris.
go ahead.
So yeah, I'm thinking at this point, like, if it's the gear that's an issue in heroic, like, might as well get the Felguard, right? Because sure, things live long enough, and maybe you get a fear off, and like that fear is gonna do his life for 20 seconds, and you have the entire dot take over it. But like, it's just not what you actually want, because in heroics, things hurt, so you kind of like want things to die as fast as possible. So even like, it's not that good. It has the advantage of having like the pet of their choice, affliction, which is one of the rare specs that does like there's basically that and DN.
Well, yeah.
If you're considering running affliction in heroics, I think you just go DN.
I totally agree.
I don't see a scenario where running like UA affliction or SL ruin affliction, like it just will not outperform DN as an affliction build.
Agreed. What about Shadow Destro, guys? What can you say about Shadow Destro heroics? The issues with okay, just to start off, we know that Shadow Destro, it's worldly known as Shadow. Besides affliction, Shadow Destro is the worst of the rating specs and the dungeoning specs. Why is that?
I wouldn't say it's the worst of the dungeoning specs. On the dungeoning specs, it's like
besides affliction.
No, but even then, like when you think about it, it pumps well enough, and compared to fire, for instance, it may pump a little bit more, but you're not in an entire raid set environment, so it doesn't really matter that much. However, you're way more comfy in terms of like not needing to think about sacrifices, not needing to think of packs. So what me and JPent enjoy, for some people it's like a huge chore. So at least you get that. And if you need to get your succubus, at least you directly sacrifice it and you still like pumping. So in the middle of a pack.
So as Fire Destro, do you guys ever swap it up and go Shadow?
100%. Oh yeah.
3 to 4 times per dungeon, maybe, depending on pack. I mean,
yeah,
especially when it's AOE heavy, you don't want to be demonic sacrificing your imp, obviously. So
before that, I assume that you guys are running ISB and not Kata.
Yeah, I am.
Can you guys please explain? We all know that Crix doesn't like Cataclysm. Can you guys please explain why you guys go ISB instead of Cataclysm in dungeons, heroics, or raids if you do it in raids as well for Fire Destros?
All right, I'll touch on this real quick. If you ever run Cataclysm for any reason, you're making a mistake. Unless you know that you are never ever going to cast a shadow one life. There is no reason to reduce cast.
You just have to be ISB to help your other group members out. Especially, well, in raids, it's of course you're going to be casting fire spells, right? So you're not going to be helping your Shadow Priest either way. But overall, it's just greedy. I totally agree with you guys.
Good. It allows you flexibility at no DPS loss, basically. So there's no reason to not do it.
Yeah. Also touch on the flexibility quickly. So it's really important now, but it's going to be even more important for some of the people that are like dedicated enough to play fire on the next raid tier, because there are some like boss encounter where you just like are shadow, and if you don't go ISB there, like for instance Alar, like it's straight up immune fire, you're not gonna go fire there.
Yeah.
So like if you just
I feel on most boss fights, other than Alar, obviously, is still really, really good. But how long do you think your mage is going to stay fire? How long do you think you're going to have improved Scorch? I mean, the drops, the mage is going to take it. Teardrops, they're going to be drooling over their 2-piece. I don't know, man. I don't have a lot of faith. I feel like the mages are just horny to start doing arcane as soon as they possibly can, which is a scary thing for fire warlocks.
What's the validity of the arc fire
discussion we could start with?
Well,
that's the biggest controversy ever. Set fire to 2 discords.
Let's not touch on the math behind it per se. Let's say that it's a guild decision that needs to be made, right? If your guild decides your warlocks are going to be fire and your mage is going to be at least arcane fire in tier 5, then sure, play fire. If it's your guild decides your mage is going full arcane frost in tier 5, then obviously you're not playing fire. It's a guild to guild basis. It just depends on the decision your guild wants to make.
I think that's the that's the most politically correct way to put
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, agreed. It's definitely you need like I say that all the time in the Discord. Like fire, like with all its advantages, should never be the default choice. Like you need to make it an affirmative choice to know that you go fire. Like you can't just say, oh, I'm rolling a warlock. I don't know what to do. Let me go play fire. You don't do that.
I completely agree. The base decision for rolling your spec should not be fire. Fire is something that has to be discussed within your raid team or your guild to make sure that you playing fire is viable, right? You can't just say, I'm going to play fire even though we have a shadow priest but no fire mage. It doesn't work like that. You need to make sure you have the correct support within whatever raid you're doing, whatever raid group / guild you're in to play fire. It's a guild decision, not your decision, basically.
Well, what Chronosize pointed out in Twitch chat is also true. I mean, even if you do want to play fire, at least fire Destro is flexible. You know, it's not a big deal if you have to put on some shadow gear and take off your spellfire and you know, just demonic sacrifice your succubus or something like that. So at least it does have that flexibility to it. It's not like, oh, I spec fire. Literally all I can do is cast incinerate and that's it.
Right. And I think a lot of
Yeah.
people don't, I mean, I'm sure they realize it, they just don't really consider it. Like, say your fire mage misses raid for 1 week. Okay, you swap off a few pieces of spellfire and your
Right. Yeah.
shadow destro minus frozen shadow weave, which isn't even technically that strong. So it's like you're going to pump just as much as shadow destro as the other shadow destro warlocks. Just if your fire mage is absent, you just switch, right? It's not like you're limited by playing a destruction spec, because I'm sure most people know, but if people don't know, Fire Destro, Shadow Destro are the exact same spec. The only difference is the pet that you sacrifice.
Yeah, exactly.
Show the spec just now, just in case people don't know what the spec looks like. Boom. Literally the same spec. Okay, Bob. There's a lot of ads on this one. Sorry. That's just a typical spec. Like I said, you don't run Cataclysm for many reasons. In game, maybe you might see some usage, but ISP for the many reasons that they already named, which I don't need to go into because I don't play Fire Destro. This is the typical build right here. And just to continue off Fire Destro, we're gonna go over to the raid specs next. All right. Starting with you guys, Fire Boys, and then we'll go down to Demo, and then we'll go down to the rest of them. We don't have any footage of them playing Fire. They're going to record some for the next podcast, the two Fire Boys right now. So I just looked for some friends of mine that were doing Fire. Obviously, me and Alive have never done it as Fire. So it's just going to be old footage of people doing Fire, why they talk about Fire. So go ahead, Brian, J-Paint, take it off. Praise the spec, boys.
All right.
Sure.
Ryu I can go ahead and see what he's got to say.
Oh God, I wanted to let you go, but let's go. No, so here's the thing. It's an easy, like, in terms of specs, it's an easy one to play because it's a Destro spec, of course. So you're only like going for Immolate and Incinerate, and on top of that, it's like the theoretical best spec for single target when you can turret. So if that's what you want to do, and you know, like if you like optimizing patchwork things, that's definitely where it excels. So that's mainly because of two things. So one, the fact that we have the 2.4.3 talents. So Ember Storm is no buffing Incinerate by decreasing its cast time, which just makes Incinerate, which was already a fairly good spell on its right, like just amazing baseline. So that's literally the spec. Like Fire is the spec that scales the best of all the warlocks, like excluding, like even including red buffs and everything. Like J-Pen could give more color on that later, but
We got like background noise coming from something that I have open. I don't know what it is.
Oh, yeah, I'll let you sort that out quickly. But yeah, so to keep going, that's a spec that's like easy to pick up and that will pump if the conditions are there. The problem is, like we touched upon a bit before, the conditions are fairly restrictive. One of them being that you do need to improve Scorch debuff, which is 15% fire damage for those who don't know, provided by a fire mage, or at least a mage that has like, I think it's 18 point in fire. So it's like not nothing. So right now, a lot of mages are still like pumping as fire because it's still a very good spec. But as Alive said, next year there's going to be a huge contention because quite a lot of them will want to go Arcane, and theoretically their best typical theoretical DPS is going into the Arcane tree and then going into the Frost tree, so not touching fire at all. There is like another spec which goes into the Arcane tree and then the Fire tree to provide Scorch, and that's hotly debated. Hotly debated because the question is like, is the gain to the fire logs and like over ancillary fire user, you know, so like shaman and everything, does it outweigh what a mage loses by losing like double icy veins? Right now we're kind of like in a holding pattern. As Japan say, it's a group decision, it's a guild decision, and we'll just have to see how long the bosses last in T5, because like, you know, if they last only 40 seconds, well, mage is gonna be blowing up numbers completely nuts, so you don't want to deprive them of that. If that lasts a little bit longer, well, like around 2.5, 3 minutes of a fight, like fire is in the game for the discussion. So yeah, here's the thing. So from a warlock perspective, fire pumps. It's a really good spec. It pumps in single target though. It needs a turret, which some other spec don't have as much an issue with, like dot specs and pet specs. But I'll leave you guys talk about it. And yeah, but it has the problem of, you know, needing a fire mage and needing imp, which now our AoE damage is not fire anymore. So, you know, Seed of Corruption. Everybody knows Seed go brr. So you need a succubus for that.
Yeah, so as Ryu touched on, fire is hands down the highest single target DPS spec you can run right now. And that is true for the whole game. That is not right now, right? People always say, oh, well, Shadow outscales fire, this, that, and the other, ISB. But the crit rating, the spell power rating, or just the spell power value you need for Shadow to outscale fire is not reachable even in Sunwell Abyss. So that being said, it's your highest single target DPS for you personally. Will it be a raid DPS increase is another question. That's something you need to work out with your guild too. That's pretty much the whole discussion. So why is fire your best spec, right? First off, it has way more modifiers than Shadow Destro from just personal and debuffs, right? And also, the base damage of Incinerate is just considerably higher than Shadow Bolt, right? So you have to take that into consideration. Not only that, but the reduced cast time of Incinerate versus Shadow Bolt, which is 2.25 versus 2.5, and it's pretty easy to see why your Incinerates are going to do more damage on average than a Shadow Bolt. Again, fire is the highest performing spec. There's no ifs and buts about it, but you have to have a fire mage to support you. I also want to touch on, if you don't have a fire mage and you don't have a shadow priest, fire is still better than shadow. But if you have a shadow priest, no fire mage, then you're just gonna want to be shadow. Fire will not outperform shadow in that scenario.
I'm just pulling up random logs while you guys are talking. Ignore me.
Yeah, you can look at the logs for yourself. You can look at Gruul, mag parses, whatever you want. Your number one warlock is probably gonna be fire. It outperforms now. It's gonna outperform.
Number one warlock in the world, fire.
Yep. Currently, until next Tuesday.
I will say,
yeah.
Even until tonight when I go to raid, bro, we gotta watch out.
Currently, Demo played correctly can compete for numbers against Fire Destro. When I say played correctly, I mean full raid debuffs, full armor debuffs, scrolls on your pets, expose armor, curse of wreck, every single possible debuff possible. You need a survival hunter, you need maybe someone using annihilator. If you have all that, you have every possible blessing on your Felguard, everything, Demo can compete for damage. But it also requires
this is only because a lot of people are, I get this a lot in chat, is with Shadow Destro on the logs, look at the damage though. It's the strats that some people are using where they're stacking in seed spam, which is why you'll see Shadow Destro on some of these. Sorry to cut you off, JP, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I would look at Gruul for just a patchwork style fight. Yeah.
High King is really scuffed at the moment, in my opinion.
Yeah, High King parses right now, if you're not doing the burn, You're not
Okay.
parsing, right? So
This is actually an affliction lock up here.
That's pretty surprising.
This is an
Well, that's-
affliction warlock
that's,
right here,
Most,
boy.
most likely Nightfall procs.
Yeah,
I imagine that.
that's all stars though, right? It's not
Yeah.
it's not overall DPS. I don't know why those
Mhm.
guys are running affliction. Think about how much damage they would do
But
if they were running something else.
Touching on what J-Pain said, I would say it's Demonology, if played appropriately, is slightly behind Fire single target in a normal group composition. You could make a kind of stupid group, and I'm not saying that you guys should go and do this and reach out to your guild and try to do it, but technically Demonology could be more damage than single target Fire if you made like a really scuffed group of like having an enhancement shaman in your group and an Ellie shaman, and you have a shadow priest in your group, and you have a warrior for battle shout, but you would just never see that group. So essentially, yeah, Fire does beat at single target by a little bit.
Right, and it's also important to understand where Demonology excels. So let's just look at a scenario on Mag where it's your time to click a cube. You're playing Fire Destro. Let's say you have to run all the way to the back of the room for the back cube. All right, so you get there maybe 5-6 seconds early. You spent all that time running there. You've had all that downtime. Now you're waiting to click. As Fire, you lose 100% of your damage. Yeah, you might have an immolate ticking or something, right? But theoretically, you lose all of your damage. Running a Demo build, you only lose, what, I don't know, 75%, because your Felguard's still attacking the boss, doing 25% of your damage. So it's important to understand
I
that
totally agree.
fights with some movement mechanic or downtime for a caster, but not downtime for a melee pet, highly, highly, highly favors Demo.
I totally agree. I think a fight like Gruul, for example, that's like where Fire shines. You just sit there and you fucking pump him, man. Like you just obliterate the boss, and that's all you need to do. And if you're doing the High King cheese strat where you're popping Lust and pumping High King and the fight's over in like 25 seconds, I think the Fire is obviously really good there, but that's a whole different topic about what High King is doing at the moment. But on a fight like Gruul where a sim might say one thing, but in a realistic scenario where you actually have a job you have to perform, you have to click on the cube, you have to do this and that, having not only one dot like Fire does, but 2 dots, keeping up immolate and corruption, and on top of that, having your pet attacking as you're going to click on the cube or banish one of the infernals or whatever your job is, Demonology having that passive damage profile is quite useful.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I'm Team Demo. I'm Team Demo for 25 mans. It's too. Not even just. It starts off with when you first hit 70 and the gear disparationals or disparaging, whatever the word is, the gear difference of he carries. He's on a different threat meter. He doesn't go to your threat. He can pump. He's ignoring your stats. He ignores your stats while he grows with your stats at the same time, which is why I just love Demo. And just like you said on Mags, I think it's amazing for Gruuls, by the way. But on Mags, it's just the fact that your whole job as a Warlock is to CC as much as you can, and then you're clicking. And during all those times, he's just whopping down.
Another thing
he's just there chunking away at everybody every time, no matter what you do. He doesn't care what you're doing. He's chunking away. He's chunking away. He's chunking away.
Another thing to consider is Demo is extremely strong at low gear levels. Compared to other specs. Other specs just scale better with spell power and crit, right? Whereas Demo doesn't necessarily scale as well, but its base damage is just so much higher than any other spec. That's why you see in tier 4 that Demo is competitive with the top spec. Even in tier 5, single target, patchwork fight, Demo will be competitive and can be competitive. It'll still beat Shadow Destro. Will it be competitive with Fire Destro at that point? Maybe not, but it's still a viable spec to play if you enjoy, pet management and whatnot. If you don't want to manage your pet and you're not good at managing your pet, you don't want to play Demo. It takes
I think it
takes some getting used to, but
yeah, I mean, a lot like when you go in the T5, especially T5, like because T4 is done. When you look at Felguard and like you said, Alar's kind of busted because he has to go platform to platform to platform. Solarian's going to be an amazing Felguard fight. Void Reaver might be a shitty Felguard fight depending on how we do the strats. You know what I mean? KT is going to be an amazing Felguard fight. Fathom Lord's amazing. Lurker might be rough. Leo's going to be rough. That Leo's going to be super fire. Like I can't wait for T5 because that's when it really spices up. You know what I mean? And then you go talk about Mount Hydra and Black Temple. Like I feel like Felguard's just going to. I mean, I guess T6 is where Shadow Destro will start to be like, oh hey, I'm going back on top. But even in
Yeah.
T6, I feel like Felguard's gonna be like really
No,
good for some.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Basically, Felguard kind of like drops off quite a bit in like in mid to late T5. It like it kind of drops off, but it's still like around the level of shadows, like roughly depending on how you prioritize your gear, you can get like slightly different results. But
Mhm.
the interesting thing with Felguard is that, as you mentioned, it has a completely different damage profile in T5 depending on the bosses than like the standard Destro locks. So a lot of the fights where you have like a hard time pumping as a standard Destro, like Demo is going to be like chunking. And yeah, I think the latest point where you can actually use Demo might be Hydro, because of
Yeah.
A, the AoE, and like
The
Demo
AoE.
actually has one of the best seed of all the lock specs.
Well, and you
Yeah.
also don't have
Yeah.
your 4-piece yet in Mount Hydril. So that's kind of, and when
Yeah.
you get your 4-piece set to a Black Temple, and that's when Shadow is gonna be like, oh hey guys, you remember me? Like they're gonna come out. They're gonna come out in Black Temple. But before then, you only have the 2-piece by the time you're out of Mount Hydril, which makes Felguard doing all right. And that not having Ruin actually kind of does suck. Like I hate not having Ruin, right? That's why I like DN so much, because at least DN has Ruin. But not having Ruin going in the T6 and the Black Temple specifically is gonna be nice. But look how many low armor bosses there are in Black Temple.
Yeah.
People forget about the low armor bosses, which is why melee is so excels much in T6. You know, you look at Gorfy when they have these low armor and the
Hydro, like low armor, half.
Yeah,
all
like
of
two.
all of
Two?
yeah, they're
all of
very
them.
low.
all but
Two of them,
Archimon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah, okay.
I've been running Sims for T5 and some of Phase 3, especially on the low armor bosses, and Felguard and Demonology. It actually, I'm not going to say it does better than Fire Single Target if you have improved Scorch, because it doesn't. It doesn't. But it beats Shadow Destro or competes with Shadow Destro until about late Phase 3. But like J Payne said, some of the stats, they just don't scale as well as Destro. So like, let's take critical strike rating, for example. Number 1, yes, we're missing Ruin, which means obviously critical strike rating isn't as good. But on top of that, your Felguard scales with your spell power, he scales with your stamina, he scales with your intellect, he scales off of armor, penetration debuffs, whatever. But he doesn't pick up your critical strike rating. And later on, we're going to obtain haste rating with the Black Temple staff and things like that. And he also doesn't adapt to your haste rating. Yes, he can pick up Bloodlust if a shaman pops Bloodlust in your group, but he will not retroactively attack faster if you put on a bunch of haste gear. So that is where Destro really starts to shine.
Fury.
Yes, he does
head.
not
Yeah,
benefit.
I'm only saying that because I get asked that all the time. So I don't know. I know it doesn't make sense, guys.
I wish.
But he actually doesn't have a weapon. Like
Yeah,
he doesn't. He doesn't have it. He looks like he has a weapon, and he's hitting with this fucking weapon, but he's really punching. Like he doesn't have a weapon, so he doesn't get Wind Fury. Can't oil that dude's blade up or nothing.
He also doesn't, like, pets don't have a haste score. So that means like Bloodlust and PI, which is like 30
Imagine
and
that.
15%,
Yeah.
is like that affects them. But drums
Imagine
don't.
that.
Jesus, man.
Imagine a Felguard with haste, bro, and Wind Fury.
I think Felguard
He
with Wind Fury
would
is
do
like,
more
his
damage
bats
than
would be
Fury
disgusting.
Warriors.
Yeah, Felguard
Well-
with Wind Fury, that would be disgusting, honestly.
Even
would be-
even if you didn't give Felguard Wind Fury, if he scaled off of your critical strike and he had his own personal haste rating, I still think that would just be
Oh yeah.
huge. It would just be absolutely massive. You don't even need Wind Fury. But of course, I agree. If you gave the thick boy Wind Fury, oh
Damn.
my lord.
If you get
Why
the
bring a
Chad
warrior?
Guard, Wind Fury, and haste, bro, he's gonna do more damage than the fucking Fury Warriors. I promise.
Can we just give Warglaives to Felguard?
There we go. Hey, no one's running rogues anyway, right? Stokes, if you're in here, I'm sorry, but I'm just saying. Okay, so we can keep talking about Demo. I'm just gonna play this footage. This is Alive's footage from his rank 1 Demo parse. My Crix gaming thing is huge because Blame Alive, his camera is huge. I had to hide it. So yeah, keep talking. I just wanted to explain what this was.
Well, let me premise this by saying this is, I think, 6 days or 7 days into launch or something. So this is no longer the rank 1 parse. It was, but not anymore. This was weeks ago. So I think I had like 1 piece of raid gear at this point, maybe. Oh, can't see the DPS meters though.
Sorry, there's my fat face in front of it. Like, note that when it was to showcase his DPS, Crix moved me, but when it showcased yours, like, he put me back there.
Yeah.
That reminded me.
Crix is willing to show off his
Hey,
own
no, I
DPS.
just wanted to hide the
I
beginning because
see.
we know the first 10 seconds we're not pumping yet. Now we are. You gotta show a little bit.
So this just goes to show how strong Demo is, even without, you know, a bunch of raid gear, a bunch of procs going off, just base stats. A lot boosted this character. I'm sure his gear wasn't insane at this point, right? And it just shows the capabilities of it.
Yeah, most of this is just dungeon blues. As you can see, I have Robe of the Crimson Order because all I was trying to do was reach hit cap, right? So I think at this point, the only purple items I had was my helmet and gloves, and that's it. So yes, I had 2-piece, but nothing crazy. I didn't have shadow damage necklace from Karazhan. I didn't have any, you know, any epic pieces from Karazhan, really. Just the helmet and the gloves, which 2-piece is still big, don't get me wrong. 2-piece is great, but I didn't have, you know, Biscuit or anything like that.
I just love Demo, man.
I do too, and I wish that it scaled better with gear, because it's by far my most fun spec to play. You know, we say all this about, oh, you know, Destro's a turret build and whatnot. I'm fine with Destro. I like playing Destro too, but I've played a lot of Destro, and I've just been enjoying playing something else and having it actually be somewhat viable.
Yep, exactly. That's I was gonna ask this question to you specifically. The reason, like, we know that we love Warlocks. Me and Eli have been friends for a few years now about Warlock stuff. He's actually one of the reasons why I started making content on Warlock stuff in TBC. And I ask you the same thing. Why don't you play Fire? I don't play it because I don't want to always have to be Fire. I know you can get side pieces, but I didn't enter TBC with, I did quit Classic, so I didn't enter TBC with 50k gold. I entered TBC, I walked through a dark portal with 400 gold or something like that. So like, and had been farming up all my stuff for my tailoring, and I can't afford to do Spellfire and then Frozen Shadow even back and forth. And I just like being able to vary. Like, I can play Felguard tonight, or do I want to play DN? Do I want to play Shadow Destro? Do I want to do anything? That's why I didn't go Fire. So like, what made you not go Fire?
Well, I was also a boosty boy, like I said before. So I came into the expansion. I didn't have a bunch of gold stocked up. I had no Nax pieces, nothing like that. And I was just thinking to myself, how do I not dump gold into Spellfire? And luckily, you know, I did a ton of talking with J-Paint, probably annoyed the hell out of him before the expansion released. But him and I were talking about Sims just nonstop, and I was like, hey, what about this? Hey, what about this? And you know, I was super excited to see that, you know, Demonology can actually pump. You know, not only in phase 1, but potentially in phase 2 as well. Now, I will agree in T5, you know, Felguard is a melee boy. Yeah, he has intercept, but there's just any movement fight, like the Alar platforms or anything, he's not going to be good at. You know, it's the same thing with warriors and rogues and all that. You know, if there's movement, it's not going to be great. But I just really, really enjoy playing the spec, and as long as it's competitive, as long as it's, I should say, competitively viable, I'm going to play it, because I've played Destro, and Destro's all well and good, but I like to spice things up a little bit.
Right, and I think that's a lot of people's attraction to Demo is, you know, you're not just standing there. Yeah, you're still kind of pressing just a couple buttons, but you have the pet management aspect of the class, which I think is a big detriment to Warlock rating, at least in Classic, right? Because the class is supposed to be centered around, you know, demon control and whatever, and then they just have you, or they force you to sacrifice your pet and not play with a pet to do max damage, which I think is a thing in Classic maybe a lot of people didn't enjoy, so they kind of are excited to be able to do some pet management and actual raid encounters.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, Blizzard made this class with it being really heavily focused around, you know, you can summon demons from another world and blah blah blah, and then just to go and sacrifice it. I mean, I'm not talking shit about any Destro players. You know, Destro is all well and good, but it just kind of takes away from the class a little bit. So if Blizzard gives me the chance to play with my demon, I'm gonna play with him.
I agree.
I don't know, man. Like my healer's prices to keep my demon alive have been far too exorbitant for me to afford.
Why did I pay one of my healers tonight? I did the same thing. I was like, yo, I will pay you gold if you keep my goddamn Felguard alive tonight, please.
Well, just tell them that's how they parse, man. I can make my Felguard tank damage if you want to heal it.
Fel armor.
Well, you could also maybe lie to them a little bit as well, but you know, what's a white lie every now and then, right?
Oh, I love it.
So what were there any more topics about Demonology? Did anyone in chat have any topics or questions they want to bring about Demonology? Oh, actually thinking to myself, we should talk about Black Book as well. And Black Book is
how I don't have it, so
I don't have it either. I've been doing it every week, and I have a lot of people in my Discord asking me, is Black Book necessary? Like, can you just not run Demonology if you don't have Black Book? I don't have it. Crix doesn't have it. We're still pumping. Is it good to have it? Sure. You know, you can pre-pop it before you go into a fight and swap back to whatever trinket you're normally using, and your Felguard will keep the buff. So it's just a DPS bonus. You know, it's just a little bit of icing on the cake, if you know what I mean.
So let's talk about how big that bonus is, right? Let's say in all normal practices, you pop Black Book, you send your Felguard in and start a fight. The buff is 30 seconds. Let's generously say you're getting 25 seconds, right? On a 3-minute fight, you're talking about total DPS, maybe like 12 to 15 DPS increase. So it's not like you not having Black Book eliminates Demonology as a spec you can play. It is just a free damage buff, but it does not make or break the spec by any
Right,
by
you're
any
totally
means.
right.
Also,
Go on.
sorry. Yeah, no, I was gonna say when you do the burn strat on things like King Mulgar, you pretty much like have 100% uptime of this thing, which is like super huge when you're like chasing the powers at its maximum. But yeah, normal, it doesn't make or break the spec in any normal environment.
Well, if you were to do the burn strat on Hiking Mulgar, if your guild is getting like a 50-second kill time, then I would say, yeah, it's good to use because you can pop it, pre-pop it, swap to Icon, and then you'll be able to use Icon too after it comes off cooldown from the Black Book. So if you have like a 50-second kill time, it's good. But if you're like in one of these top-end, top guilds, like some of the #1 parses right now are like 16-second High King Mulgar. In those scenarios, I wouldn't use it over Icon because Icon, the spell power that you get.
I mean, keep Icon, but swap it, for instance, to Quags.
You can't pop both at the same time.
Right, so using Black Book will put your Icon on cooldown for 30 seconds.
Right.
So that eliminates your ability to use it during.
You're right.
Yeah.
So like if you were to pop Icon, for example, the spell power that you get from the Icon usage will also give your Felguard attack power. Will it give as much attack power as Black Book? No, but that spell power is affecting you and your pet. So if your kill time is omega fast, let's say you have like a 25-30 second kill time, just go with the Icon. But if you're pushing like a 50-second kill time where you could pop Black Book, you know, your Icon comes off CD because your Black Book runs out and then you can use Icon, then you want to pop Black Book ahead of time. That way you can utilize both of your on-use trinkets. But Ryu, I do wish you could pop both at the same time.
Yeah.
That would be big juice right there. That would be big juice.
All right, boys. We're getting to hour and a half, which is where we want to cut off. So we have to talk about a spec right now that gets slept on, and we got to mention it because there's one for every raid, boys, and that's Affliction. Okay, I'm gonna pick it up here where Affliction is playing in the background. Affliction is honestly the reason I started playing Warlock back in retail was because of the dot. I think many people agree with me when I say the dot aspect. The rotten dot is the most appeasing thing about a Warlock, in my opinion. Obviously, we know Affliction is not the highest parsing spec in the world, but we need to shed some light on it because there is ways to play this shit correctly. There's a difference of you being racing them. Like, just because you're Affliction doesn't mean that you're going to be at the bottom of the meters, okay? Everybody here agrees with me. You can be at the bottom of the meters, but if you're preparing the right way and you're gearing and you're doing what you need to do as an Affliction Warlock and your utility role, you can still be pushing a lot of DPS on there, right? And there needs to be light set on this. So what do you guys think about Affliction?
I'll start real quick. Affliction played correctly, played capably, and played to its max ability is a good DPS spec. The issue is that most guilds, or a lot of guilds that I interact with, they are running some sort of rotation of Affliction locks when they just have an Affliction. They switch one of their Destros to Affliction every 2 weeks or something. And doing that kind of rotation, no one wants. They just think that's like, oh, I don't get to play this week, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to do any damage. So if someone's going to play Affliction like that, it's just not even worth running an Affliction Warlock if they're not going to play it correctly, do their max damage, right? But Affliction is a very strong DPS in general, but not only does it do good damage, it brings important debuffs to the raid, such as Shadow Embrace and an improved Curse of Elements. I would say that Shadow Embrace is something that all guilds will probably run on tier 5 progression
I agree.
until things are on farm. Whether it's worth running Affliction once bosses are on farm for Shadow Embrace, I don't know. It's a guild decision, kind of like the Fire Destro discussion. But Affliction played well can perform well. You just need to know the intricacies of it.
And I'd also like to point out that a lot of people look at Sims. I mean, I do a ton of simming too, but a lot of people look at Sims and they take that as like, that's black and white, that's it. I can only, that's decided everything about my gearing, my playstyle, and that's all they take into consideration. But if you look at the 25-man content that we currently have, if you're not doing the High King cheese strat, where you're just lusting and killing High King, and you're doing the normal strategy, Affliction is actually really nice because you have tons of room to be able to multi-dot, fish for Nightfall procs and all of that. And then even on Mag, it's not that bad on Mag either because you can multi-dot the channelers in phase 1, and in phase 2 it's basically just a patchwork scenario. However, like we were talking earlier about Demonology, if you have to go click on a cube or you have any job of any sort, Affliction's pretty nice because a large percentage of your damage profile is still in effect even though you're channeling on the cube, as opposed to Destro, for example, where you're basically a turret. You have to be there casting to do the majority of your damage. So if you are the Affliction Warlock out there in your guild, don't be totally discouraged. Yeah, Gruul might not be the best fight for you, but the other two encounters that we have in 25-man content is really not bad for Affliction whatsoever.
Affliction really does pump. It's one of those things where if you look at like a fight like High King Mulgar, right? I know it sucks. You don't get the Doom. A big thing is that you don't have to Doom your Crystal Elementing, right? As Affliction lock. I look at it like, even myself, I'm in a guild with a lot of Warlocks. There's a lot of Warlocks. Yeah, I'm talking 7, 8 Warlocks. Yeah, we're running splits and stuff, but like still, I opt to do, we rotate. Like I'll gladly play Affliction. Yeah, I might not pump as hard as it fires, but having an Affliction Warlock, a confident Affliction Warlock who can pump is a drastic difference from a Affliction Warlock that is miserable being an Affliction Warlock, because like they're not trying hard. They're just there to put up Shadow Embrace and Malediction and Blood Pact. Like, yeah, but but if you really SM Ruin and you're really watching your dot timers, there are so many of these fights, like a High King Mulgar, yeah, you're elementing, but guess what? You can get 2 Dooms off. Gruuls, yes, I get it. Mags, you can get a Doom off. Phase 1, you get 2 Dooms off, right? You might not be able to Doom the second one, but you get to get some Dooms off. A lot of fights are like these where you can actually get Dooms off and still pump. Like, don't be discouraged if you have to play Affliction, because you can, like, yes, you're not going to keep up with Felguard. You're not going to keep up with Shadow Dash. You're not going to keep up with Fire Dash or DN or anything like that. But you can still impress people. You can still make those guys sweat. Damn, this dude's fucking kind of pump it a little bit. Like what? Like you want them to say that. And it's a good look for you and your GM as well, your raid leader as well. Like a lot of new Warlocks say are applying to a guild who has 3 other Warlocks, but they've been in there for a while. So I'm the new Warlock, I guess. Okay, yeah, you can be in the guild, but you have to be Affliction. And okay, I guess I'll be the bottom spec. Show them that you are the bottom spec, but you're not bottom of the meters. You should never be bottom 15 as an Affliction lock. There's no way. Not right now. Right now, you could still be top 10, top 7, 8, 9, or 7, 6, 5 right there just as Affliction by pumping. Like, you're not going to be the bottom of the meters. Yeah, you can be, and people see that a lot because they don't know what they're doing, or they're just so like, oh, I'm just going to put a dot up and keep some corruption up and let my imp pump. Like, there's ways to play Affliction where you're going to still be like top 10, where it's still good DPS, which people are like, oh my god, this is pretty good yet.
And like you were saying about the whole guild aspect, you could be a little political about it too, because, and I know this isn't anything about Sims or math or whatever, but a lot of guilds want to have an Affliction Warlock, and you could be a little political and say, yeah, I'll be Affliction for phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, no problem, guys. But when T5 comes out and you see Fang of the Leviathan drop, maybe I get a little priority coming my way for playing the Affliction spec for the raid. Play the little politics role a little bit.
Yeah. Also, I think one thing for Affliction is fairly slept upon is that, as I say, it's easily the most in-depth spec of all Warlocks rotation-wise, and like compared to the others, even Demo is like, it has the pet, but it has like 2 dots and then Shadow Bolt. Like Unstable Afflictions are like 3.5 dots. Well, basically they simulate, there's corruption, there's Unstable Affliction, and there's Siphon Life sometimes. And that's the thing, like, if you really want to go into the nitty-gritty of it, you can really extract a lot more value than just getting into it and just and half-assing it. So, and I think especially right now, because the gear is not that huge in terms of scaling, as Affliction you can have some pretty surprising results. Like basically at its maximum, theoretically right now Affliction can beat Shadow. And I'm not even talking about mechanics, right? Because as everybody said, like you go clicking a cube, fire Destro as Immolate, like Shadow Destro maybe as Immolate, like Affliction has like half of his damage going. So it's really just it can be a very interesting spec to play, and with very good results even. So people just like think of it as the bottom feeder spec, just support spec, and they don't think that like you're still a Warlock spec, you're still fucking pumping, right? So
as long as you're playing a purple boy, you're owning.
There you go.
Yeah,
no, exactly.
My advice in regards to Affliction is I would never force anybody to play Affliction. The raid DPS or raid damage loss is not going to be significant either way at this gear level. And as gear progresses, it's going to become even less. I think I ran something for my raid the other day, and it ended up being like a 30 DPS increase to run this Affliction lock. Are we even going to notice that 30 DPS difference? No, the standard deviation.
I mean, if you get clapped,
Destro,
yeah. If the tank gets
It's
clapped,
fine,
yeah, you
fine.
will.
Right.
Come on.
Shadow Embrace.
Right.
If you're one of those guilds who are a little bit not struggling, but you kind of like you're squeaking your way through mags or gruels, yeah, you will. Shadow
Right.
Embrace.
but of course, if your guild is fine, you're killing bosses, your tank isn't getting one shot, he's not
There you
getting
go.
clapped. If someone doesn't want to play Affliction, I would not force them to play Affliction. It's just not worth it for somebody to not enjoy playing the game for your raid to do 15 more DPS.
Well,
If they want to play Affliction, that's great. They're going to do it to the highest extent, then have them play Affliction, that's fine.
Affliction
Right.
can also be kind of awkward, like going forward with gearing as well, because it kind of runs into the same problem that Demonology has, and that's that your dots, the main profile, the main damage in your profile of damage, they don't scale with haste, and they can't crit. So yeah, you could say, oh well, if you get haste, you get faster globals, but it doesn't scale nearly as well as it does with Destro. So going forward, it's not like you can say, oh, well, I'm just going to gear all spell power, because we don't have this perfect world where you can just choose to not get crit gear and you can have all flat spell power gear and you can just gear however you want. There's only a set amount of gear. You can't change the stats on it. There's no way to change the stats on it. So you're going to end up getting some haste. You're going to end up getting some crit. And even though the spec doesn't scale well with it, you just don't have any other choice.
I completely agree.
Very true. I agree too, my man. Well, guys, I think we made it past our first episode. Anything else you guys want to add about anything?
Do
miss
we want to grab some questions from chat before we cut
let's
out?
spend a couple.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do some.
Yeah.
So we're aiming to be 1.5 hour episodes, and we're gonna do this bi-weekly. We might do the second episode next week because it's gonna be about rating as well. So it's gonna be like a parse guide kind of. If you guys, I know there's questions asked. If you have questions regarding some shit, if it's just questions regarding general Warlock things, my stream is gonna keep going. I have raid in 45 minutes where I'll be raiding as Felguard 25 mans, so I can answer any questions. If it's anything related to Rye, Alive, J-Paint, Fire Destro, anything, shoot them now. Shoot them now.
I think we have
answer.
the first one right here from
Go
Sauron.
ahead.
He's asking if I'm going into Kara for the first time and I barely have hit cap or even don't quite have hit cap, what spec should I be running? And I'm just going to start it off by saying you probably don't want to go AF because of short burst fights. Even things like Curator, where you're meant to be helping out with Sparks, putting dots up on Sparks and anything that dies quickly is just going to be a feels bad. You generally would want to go Affliction if you're really, really lacking on hit rating. That way you can utilize Suppression.
We're talking like fresh 70 type shit. By the way.
Right.
Like-
Even then, because it's only on your dots, right? So
Yeah, let's
damage-
let's delve into that a little bit because I get asked this a lot. Affliction. When should I be Affliction? When should I switch? And I'm gonna tell you guys. Typically, fresh 70, I'm Affliction not that long. I'm Affliction until I get Spell Strike. Usually, once I get Spell Strike, I'm already swapping out. Usually once I'm UA for maybe one cycle. As soon as I get 10% hit, I switch to 10% hit on. 10% crit on character sheet, not counting totems. So the character sheet, I switch to SM Ruin, and then right after I get any kind of spell strike or crafting done, I switch out of it. I never look back. What about you guys?
If from a pure damage perspective,
Never.
never,
Kind of.
yeah.
Really never.
If you're looking max damage spec that you have available to you at any point, affliction is never gonna be your maximum damage spec on a
Right.
single target fight, right?
And even if you just hit 60, like Robe of the Crimson Order gives you 30 hit rating. It doesn't cost that much. You can even buy a cloak with hit rating on it. There's a lot of BOE blues that you can get hit rating on it. So even as a fresh 60, you can dump, or 70, you can dump a little bit of gold and you're not going to be sitting at like 4% hit. You can actually generate quite a bit of hit by just buying blues off the auction house or using like some quest items if you did a bit of questing and things like that.
So I see another question I want to touch on.
Go
So
ahead.
user 1v1 said, so I'm watching top 100 warlocks that don't rotate immolate in as Shadow Destro, even though a lot of videos say to rotate. So, straight up, immolate as Shadow Destro is a DPS increase unless you have at least 300 more shadow power than firepower. If you don't have Scorch. If you have Scorch, immolate is always, always, always a DPS increase no matter what. That being said, a lot of warlocks just don't know that information, so looking at these top 100 parses might not be really indicative of what's best. They might have just gotten lucky on some crits. I will say though that throwing immolate into your rotation does decrease the theoretical max damage you can do,
Right,
because
yeah.
your shadow bolts
Yeah.
obviously more like 100% of that damage can crit, where immolate damage only 20% or whatever can crit. So it's important to understand that you reduce the standard deviation of Shadow Destro by throwing in immolate, but you increase the mean or average.
Well, it's the same way as
Decrease the mean, by the way. Sorry.
it's
Yeah,
the,
Being immolate to decrease the.
it's the same thing that we saw in Classic.
Okay,
You know,
yes.
if you played Classic as a Warlock, like a lot of the top parses are just Shadow Bolt spam. They didn't do corruption, and that's because, like J Payne said, your damage ceiling is higher with just spamming Shadow Bolt, although your variance also increases. So doing immolate and corruption and things like that in TBC will decrease your variance but lower your ceiling at the same time. So a lot of these top parses, they went for the more variance and higher potential type play, and they were rewarded because they got lucky on crits.
Dig
All right, let's see if we can grab another question. Anybody see a good one?
Is that a week or add-on live to track your dots? I use an
Nug
add-on.
running.
Nug
Nug
running
running.
is what it's called. There you go.
One thing that I saw that I actually want to touch upon is that earlier on, so who was it again? Somebody asked, random XYZ, I don't know. It asked, is there a certain amount of lock mages, shadow priest, and boomkin need to make affliction worth? So I kind of want to say it actually depends on how many locks you have, because of what we call the caster group. So, you know, the typical caster group, as we call, is like three warlocks, one elemental shaman for the totem of wrath and totem of wrath of air. You know, so 3% hit, 3% crit, and like 100 plus spell power. I think it's 101 baseline, and it goes to 120 or something like that. So that's like the standard caster group. So ideally, you put like 3 destruction warlock in it, or like maybe demonology warlocks. And so if you have more than 3 warlocks, you get the affliction. That would definitely be by default put outside of that group. And since it scales less than the destruction on the hit, crit, and spell power, it would actually decrease the relative difference between like a destruction lock outside of that group and an affliction lock outside of that group.
Right, that is
So-
something to consider, is that most affliction locks are playing outside of what we call the normal caster group, which does decrease their average damage, right? So it's important to understand how your raid comp stacks up against that.
Exactly. So basically, if you have only 3 locks, most likely you don't have enough caster to make it worth, except if you're like having a lot of mages from like a holdover from Classic. If you have more than 3 locks, likely you do. Of course, that's more of a simit situation, or like just look at your logs and see. But that's like a fairly good rule of thumb that I've seen hold true for most of the raids out there.
I see a couple questions, 2 questions I want to run through real quick. Someone said hard cast corruption with 4 out of 5 tier 4 as Shadow Destro. I assume they are meaning. The answer is
go ahead and
yes.
hit that T4 question too.
Yeah, so the answer for Shadow Destro, your normal rotation is Shadow Bolt and Immolate, right? That's what you want to keep up. If you have 4-piece tier 4, corruption then becomes worth casting because its damage per second casting is now higher than your Shadow Bolt, right? So that being said, it's another scenario where you lower your DPS ceiling but increase the average. So whether you want to cast it or not is up to you, but from a statistical standpoint, it is worth casting.
Well, yes and no. By going 4-piece tier 4, you're not losing nothing. You're
Right,
sacrificing.
exactly.
You would have to change out your gloves, and that means you're not going to have your hit rating gloves, which means you have to get hit rating elsewhere. And if you swapped out your pants, let's say you didn't run Spell Strike, you're missing out on a triple gem socket. So yes, it does become worth casting, just straight up hard casting, but it's not like you're losing nothing for going 4-piece in the first place.
Yeah,
which is where I kind of want to take it back off that and say that I think 4-piece T4 is worth running for Felguard. I don't think it's worth running for Shadow Destro because in this opinion, and in the situation that I'm in currently, I have 3-piece. I'm running 2-piece helm gloves, so I would have to sit Frozen Shadow Wave chest and shoulders for 3 seconds on emo and corruption.
So that's another Simmet scenario where it's like, is what you lose from wearing tier 4-piece worth gaining that bonus? So it's very individual based on the gear that you have available to you. In full BIS, tier 4-piece, like you can build a set with tier 4-piece that does more than not using 4-piece. Whether that's going to be the fact for you and your current gear level is another question. I would recommend simming that with one of the sims available in the Warlock Discord currently. But typically, yes, if your best gear set is using tier 4-piece, you cast corruption. Another quick one, Destro Pot or Mana Pot has more value during Bloodlust. So, interesting topic, pretty straightforward answer. If a Mana Pot saves you a stationary life tap, so time that you could have been casting a Shadow Bolt or Incinerate or some dot, Mana Pot is always better than Destruction Pot. If you have some downtime to life tap that Mana Pot wouldn't really save you a cast, then Destruction Pot is better. But typically you probably are going to go not during Lust, but need to tap during Lust, in which case a Mana Pot is actually going to serve you better.
I think especially if you're lusting into seed spam, then Mana Pot is huge.
Yeah,
because seed spam, you're going to run out of mana in an instant, especially if you have quags proccing and all that good stuff.
Correct.
Yeah, definitely, I'd say that even though it's very tempting to go Destruction Potion, and actually, it's in terms of stacking CDs, generally speaking, you should want to stack Haste with every spell power / crit increase, and if it's not Haste, you kind of make them sequential. It has less of an increase, like just because of how it works. Like, for instance, if you have like 2 spell power like Blood Fury and a Trinket, and you just have them, like in a vacuum, it doesn't change much stacking them or putting them one after the other. If you have Haste in there, you do want to stack them. However, as I mentioned, mana is a consideration, and Lust is usually long enough that you actually want to tap in the middle of it. So Mana Pot tends to be the better choice in Lust.
So I like to do, pretty much what I do is I Destro Pot on pool 98% of the time with Lust, cooldowns, Blood Fury, Trinket, everything. I'm Destro Potting on pool. And then I will Mana Pot the rest of that depending on the fight. Mag Daradon, you will never see me using a Mana Pot because you have a knockback, guys. If you didn't know, don't tap unless you're in that knockback. Once phase 2 happens, as soon as you get knocked back every time, which happens every minute, tap. Other than that, I like Mana Pots. I use more Mana Pots than I use Destro Pots, other than that fight. And that goes the same way with T5. There's fights where you get to so much movement that you don't... Anything where you have a lot of movement and you know it, like Mags, you have so much movement. Even Gruels, you kind of have a lot of movement too. But that's kind of got to be careful because what if you get a cave and you dome yourself? But anything with a lot of movement and you don't need... You know in your head, like, I have so much time to tap, Destro Pot.
Yep,
I know it sucks, and I know it makes no sense to you guys. I know it's mind-boggling to think, like, why would I pop a fucking mana potion over a Destro potion that crit and the spell powers? But more Shadow Bolts, man.
And I'm not trying to just be a demonology shill, you know?
Yeah, you are.
But, okay, well, yeah, maybe I am. But
you're not trying, at least that's important, right?
So something that's interesting is, like Ryu was saying earlier, the typical Warlock group has a Moonkin and an Ellie Shaman in it. But for Demonology, it's actually simming to be more DPS if you didn't have a Moonkin in your group and you had a Shadow Priest in your group instead. Now, that means multiple different things. If you're in a healing intensive fight, obviously healers want that extra mana and you probably should put it in that group. But if you can convince your group and your demo boys, maybe you don't have to pop that mana pot. The Shadow Priest is coming through clutch for you. But obviously that's a little bit of a Demonology shill, and obviously your healers do want mana, but I just wanted to toss that out there because a lot of people go to the standard setup like, okay, I need a Moonkin, I need an Ellie Shaman, but Shadow Priest is actually a little bit better. And if your tank does enough threat where he can actually use Vampiric Embrace, he can help keep your Felguard up too.
Okay, and just to finish this up until 1 second. Any thoughts on MD Ruin? I would just like to chime in here, Nordic Gnome, and say that is the next build next week that I'm going to be trying out. I will make a video on it if it's worth making a video on. This spec, guys, for those that don't know, all it is dropping Felguard and putting that point in Ruin, and that's it. And either passing your Succubus and taking it more, which then you lose Shadow and Flame, or you let her pump. Theoretically, I don't think it's going to be better, but I'm going to try it.
Yeah.
Theoretically,
you do need to let the Succubus pump, and it is theoretically better, but that's it. She needs to pump, she needs to survive, and
she gets melted.
To be sure, she will 100, one
ISB
shot right away.
Yeah. But it's the thing, like, although she fucks up ISB uptime with Lash of Pain, because that eats a charge. So you need to micromanage that by hand.
Yeah.
So you know, have fun.
That's the potential's there, but that is super sketchy, my friend. But obviously, you know, Crix has never made a mistake in his life, so I'm sure he can pull it off.
Shut the fuck up. All I do is make mistakes, okay? These are the guys who Ryan J. Painter. Well, you know, since we're ending, let me end this one time for those that weren't here in the beginning. Alive is alive. Like, we know who Alive is. That's the progress raider. Now he quit. He might go back. You never know what he's doing, but that's my inspiration to pump. And then Ryan J. Painter are the ones who, hey bud, you should do this, and I do it, and I just make the videos on it. But they're the brains in my brain. I wouldn't be Crix without all three of these guys in the chat right now. I'm not fucking just saying that. I love these guys. I love the Warlock Discord. You know, we're all family. So make sure that I'll link it one more time before we link everybody's shit real quick. Join the Warlock Discord. Make sure you go to role selection before you ask why I can't fucking see anything. Go to role selection, click TBC, thank me later, and have fun in there, okay? Any closing thoughts and goodbyes you guys want to say while linking your guys' chat? I mean, well, I don't know if Ryan J. Pan have one alive. I'll get yours.
So just as a closing, in the Warlock Discord, when you guys are playing on your server, when you're playing in your guild, you know, we memed and we make jokes and we have fun and whatnot, you know, just, you know, teasing each other, making some banter, but all of the Warlock specs are good, and I don't think that you should shit talk any Warlock player or any Warlock in your guild or on your server or anything for playing XYZ spec. You know, there's multiple different specs that you can play, just like J-Pain said when we first started the podcast, and there's a lot of specs that are viable. Maybe they might be like 20 DPS different or 30 DPS different, but there's a lot of viable specs. So we might be teasing each other here and there, but let's try to not shit talk each other and say like, oh, you're not fire, what a loser, or you're shadow, what a loser. I mean, we're all playing the game. We're all purple boys. We're all family. We're all, you know, part of the Warlock community, and we're pumping, man. This is our expansion. This is our time to shine. So, you know, let's have a good time and do it.
Big Rai, what do you got to say, Bubby?
I mean, I disagree. Of course, my spec is the best there is, and it's
objectively... No, your spec is shit. No.
It's objectively true. No. I mean, I completely agree. Like, that's our time. We're definitely a community, and we just want to like grow together. That's the thing. Like, my story is like I came from basically nobody, just lurking over there, like lurking in the Discord, finding things. Oh, that's interesting. Let me just put on a spreadsheet and see. And well, no, I'm invited to. I'm sorry, not shit talk spec, but you know, give my opinion. So that's the thing. We just want to be there to help, and yeah. Let's
That's
bump.
what they're there for, man. Like before the Warlock Discord even decided to do TBC, all 4 of us we made our own Discord. TBC was strictly for TBC back when we were all doing private servers to make sure everybody had that knowledge out. Unlike Classic, where we came in a little blind. That's what we're all here to do, man.
That's what the
Go ahead.
Discord's for. That's what all this information is for. Is to kind of correct a lot of false information that has been out there, or not necessarily completely false, but also a lot of unknowns. We're just trying to get that information out there and provide the knowledge that we've accumulated over the years. So hope everyone enjoyed the podcast. Thanks for having me, Crix. I appreciate it.
Oh, of course. We'll be here next week. So guys, we don't know if we're going to come next week or the 2 weeks from now. We might do next week because this is going to be another rating episode. We're going to go over parsing per boss. We're going every single boss in Karazhan, every single 25 boss, taking our perspectives on each. As you know, we have 2 demos in here. We have 2 fires in here. I will be representing the DN next week. We have a live on the demos and the 2 fires here for when we go next week. So we might do one next week a little bit earlier, bro. But that's it for the first episode, guys. It'll be on YouTube. I'm going to trim it down. I'm still streaming because I have raid in an hour. So stick around. I'm going to be 25 manning as alive, as in Felguard. I got to try to catch up to his parses. Yeah, I got to try to catch up to his parses.
The corrupt loot council. I see all those purples on your character, man. I see it. I see it. You're making me jealous, man. I'm sitting over here with like gimp, stupid, like I got like dungeon gear, and you're like full bisp.
I mean,
yeah. Well, I would just like to say that it's
right to be corrupt. No.
Yeah.
I don't even have 2-piece, dude. Come on.
Jeez.
Ooh, J Paint's really in the dumpster then.
Yeah, I may or may not have fell in some
I don't
gear,
even
but
have 2-piece even like.
Oh really?
Yeah, man. Like
probably because you're playing fire. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Right. I managed to be like I think the lowest geared warlock in my guild, so you know, happy for the boys. Maybe.
Let's get it.
All right, appreciate
brothers,
it.
we'll see you guys tomorrow. I'm going to continue my stream, so just leave chat and then we'll do it. People who want to continue to remain while I pump, go ahead and do it. If not, then we'll see you guys next